Hi, welcome to the Hillary Earl podcast. I'm Hillary Earl, and this is where we talk about truth over trend, and we talk about faith, politics, and everything in between. So today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the racist roots of the pro-choice or abortion industry. The reason this kind of came on my radar is in the last few weeks, there has been a lot of discussion about race and white supremacy. And there's a narrative that has developed that I am seeing people that I know well that should know better are kind of putting this out there that in the MAGA movement or in the conservative movement or even the Christian movement, Christian conservative movement, that if you hold to any of those groups that you are racist or you are a white supremacist. And honestly, it's something that boggles my mind because all of the facts kind of speak just the opposite of that. So it kind of came up with the Bad Bunny halftime show initially, okay? And I'm seeing friends post things like, if you didn't watch Bad Bunny, you're against diversity. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a second, Bad Bunny was in the halftime show a few years ago, sang in Spanish, nobody had an issue. Going back probably 20 years ago, Gloria Estefan was a halftime show. J-Lo, Shakira also sang in Spanish. Nobody had an issue, okay? So it's not a minority diversity thing at all. Michael Jackson, Janet Jackson, Beyonce, Jay-Z, Bruno Mars, all of these, Prince, okay? All of these minority artists, halftime show, we've never seen a mass exodus of Christians and conservatives moving or flipping to another channel or objecting in any way. So the Bad Bunny was purely over his lyrics in the songs that have made him popular as of late, which are very X-rated, that are very demeaning towards women. So I don't know why the feminists aren't, speaking up a little bit. But that is what prompted TPUSA to say, look, enough. We've got families. We care about the content that our children are viewing. You have made this halftime show something that we cannot participate in. And that's why we're voting with our feet and turning the channel. But again, I'm seeing like this bigger picture thing. I'm seeing that a lot of folks are really believing that everybody must be a racist. And the funny thing is, I think probably one of the things that speaks loudest against that idea, and more that conservatives and Christians and Republicans are actually for minorities, is probably crystallized in the fact that we are the ones that are pro-life. Because when you really examine abortion and the pro-choice movement, you see that it has singly been the greatest tool or mechanism to eliminate Black and minority lives. Mic drop. And I'm going to walk you through that. So if you had a bunch of racists in the Republican Party or in the MAGA movement, why would they not just sit back and allow the pro-choice movement to continue to reduce minority populations? Why are they the only ones fighting to try to stop the elimination of Black babies, frankly? Because the numbers, the stats are so heavily slanted. The abortion statistics, most of the babies that are being aborted are a disparaging figure is Black babies. In fact, I remember reading something, and this is something you've heard probably several times now, in the state of New York, it eclipsed basically 50-50. More Black babies are aborted than are born in New York. And that to me is a harrowing statistic. So I want to present today a question or make a case, if you will, that your pro-choice stance is actually pro-racist, okay? And feel free to argue that, feel free to counter that, but let me lay out my case. So the abortion industry, as we know, pretty much was championed and started in the early 1900s by a woman by the name of Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger was a eugenicist. So let me talk a little bit about eugenics in case you don't know, but this was the science of the day, okay? This was the common belief that negative traits were biological. They were genetic, to include things like what they called pauperism, which would be poverty or being poor. So they felt that if you were poor and broke all the time, it was because you had a genetic defect, okay? That this isn't something tied to choice or opportunity, it was in your DNA. Thievery or propensity toward crime, also a genetic trait, not a choice trait. And even promiscuity, if you were loose, if you were sleeping around a lot, these were genetic traits. They further believed, just as we will breed animals so that, we try to get the best possible runner, the fastest horse, that we could do this potentially with humans, okay? We could try to eliminate weaker stock, if you will, by uplifting better stock's fertility or whatnot. All right, so for example, Margaret Sanger, when she talked about all of her efforts with abortion clinics and birth control, she put them into ghettos in minority neighborhoods. She called it the Negro Project. She said it was her goal to reduce, and she felt it was society's job to reduce the procreation of defective stock. This is her quote. Look it up, and we'll have it, I'm sure we'll have it spliced in here somewhere. So the roots of the abortion industry were purely to do what Hitler was doing in Germany, which was he was trying to racially purify Germany of Jewish people and the world for that part. So where does this all come from? Part of it was eugenics and what they saw on the science side with animal breeding. But some of this also came from, at this time, we saw Darwin was talking about survival of the fittest and had created kind of this narrative that if the human race is going to survive, we've got to make sure that we are advancing herdier stock, okay? Otherwise, we're all at risk for extinction. So this was his narrative. Now, he had a nephew, and his name escapes me, but his nephew wrote a book that basically brought that concept into the human arena. And he was a huge eugenicist and believed that this was something that the more elite races had to do. Now, you kind of ask yourself, and I asked myself this, where did all this come from on the human level? And interestingly, there was a woman who was an occultist, so she was a Satanist. So for all you Christians out there, know that all of this, racism, all of these things, comes purely from the pit of hell, okay? She was an occultist, a Satanist. Her name was Madame Blavatsky, and she wrote a treatise that basically informed Hitler, it informed Margaret Sanger, it informed Darwin's nephew, and basically in it, she's the one that actually came up with the phrase, the Aryan race. We hear this often attributed to Hitler. He didn't create that. He got that from her, okay? So the Aryan race, according to her, was kind of a superhuman race, and they lost their greatness because they intermingled or interbred with lesser races. And in order for them to get back to their elite ruling ability, they needed to do acts of racial cleansing or racial hygiene, practice racial hygiene, if you will. So we see in early Germany, before even World War II and Hitler in the concentration camps, Germany had a mass sterilization program. So they would sterilize people so that they couldn't procreate if they weren't fully German. Like in order to get married, you actually had to prove your German roots on both sides. If you had mental health, like mental illness or genetic illnesses in the family, you could be subject to being sterilized. Okay, so they sterilized hundreds of thousands of people. And this was all in the name of eugenics. Now, part of the reason they wanted to start to move Jews out of German neighborhoods is the German people believed that they didn't want to interbreed with other races. So how inconvenient would it be for your daughter Susie to go to school with, this Jewish boy, fall in love, and now you've got a bit of a problem, right? From their perspective. So this is where they began to start to really look at Jews differently and whatnot. And all of this comes from Madame Blavatsky's book that informed Hitler, that informed Sanger, and informed the eugenics movement. So going back to Margaret Sanger, in fact, many of the American eugenics or eugenicists like her wrote about Hitler, okay, before all of his horrors, but before they knew all of it, when he was starting to sterilize people and do things, they basically said, he's eating our supper. This was our idea, and he is actually acting on it in a bigger way, and we should be doing more, okay? So what Margaret Sanger did is, again, she thought that the way forward would be to cull the reproduction of what she considered to be lesser groups. Now, this was such a huge movement. This wasn't just like, this was all over the world, okay? In fact, it went all the way up to our Supreme Court. There was a case of Carrie Bucks, and she was a young girl, 13 years old, that was put into foster care. Her foster parents were very negligent. They were mean people from what I read, and they allowed their nephew actually raped Carrie, and she got pregnant at 13. And the case went all the way up where the state wanted to sterilize her because of her defective traits, which they thought she was sexually immoral, she was a loose woman. And if you look even at the case, the court decided that yes, we should be able to sterilize someone like this because it's a kindness and it's good for society, because it would be kinder for us to sterilize her now than for us to have the burden of imprisoning her child when they become an adult. And this is the language that was actually in the Supreme Court decision. So this is insane, really. But this was the science of the day. This was the law of the day. This was the belief of the day. And what's interesting is it's absolutely racist at its core. Now, if we were to fast forward, it's not like that today, blah, 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 blah. Well, let me ask you, anytime you see a debate or you question anybody about abortion, what is one of the first justifications they make for abortion? Well, it would certainly be better for us to abort the child than for them to be born into a home where the mother can't afford them and blah, 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 blah. How many times have we heard that? And isn't it almost identical to the logic that was used by the Supreme Court, by Margaret Sanger, by the eugenicists of the day, right? Oh, this person is going to be poverty stricken anyway, so it'd be better to kill them because then they're not a burden on society. Okay. So it's the same logic. And what's fascinating is nobody is asking a woman to raise the child. Okay. Oh, sorry, I'm getting a call. No. Nobody is asking them to raise the child. You can have the child and you can give the child up for adoption. And I will tell you, there are millions of people that are willing to adopt today. Me and my husband were one. It's very challenging to try to adopt a baby. It's like you can't find anyone that's willing to give up their child. They're choosing abortion. I have many friends that have tried, and it can take years. The reality is infertility numbers are worsening in the United States. And so there is clearly a place for this. But we don't federally fund adoption, do we? We federally fund abortion, that's not a problem. But why don't we federally fund adoption, right? So is it really about, good outcomes and things like that? It's really not. It's really about death. And I believe at its core, it's about reducing populations of people that some see as challenged or some see as poor or what have you. So just give me a second. Now, what's interesting is in the United States, probably in the 30s, 40s, and I would have to check on exactly that time, but 30s, 40s, even into the 50s, in the Carolinas, there was actually a eugenicist program that allowed social workers to be the sole legal authority to decide if a young girl was sterilized. So basically, if they were working with, say, a young girl that got pregnant and had a baby and she was on social services, they would be able to reach out to the eugenics office and get permission to lie to this girl and give her a surgery for something else and sterilize them. And there was many, many, many women that were sterilized without their knowledge and without their consent. Okay? So this is, again, hey, we're doing good for society. But if we really care about women and we really care about women's choice, then we have to ask ourselves, look at the roots of this movement. Is it really about women and choice? Really? And I say to people all the time, I talked to somebody recently and I said, there's a side to abortion that nobody talks about. And when women have an abortion, the statistics are there. They are at risk just by virtue of having abortion for higher rates of suicide, alcohol, and drug abuse. Because it's not, as much as we want to tell ourselves it's just a clump of cells, the reality is God created you to nurture and want and have this child. And when you go against everything that you are wired with, and you try to make yourself believe it's convenient and it's a good thing, when you go against that, there is a torment, unfortunately, because we know. I know people, I have a friend and she had an abortion over 50 years ago, and she will tear up instantly at mentioning it 50 years later. I have friends that have said at, 2 years post-abortion, they'd see 2-year-olds and they would wonder what their kid might have been like. Or they'd see a 10-year-old 10 years later and they wonder what would that kid would have been like had they made a different choice. And you know what? The abortion industry, if you're a pro-choice person and you really say you care about women, then why is there not an ounce of counseling about the other options? In fact, we have seen people like Elizabeth Warren and other Democrats that have tried to send letters to pregnancy resource centers that try to create and pass a law that would not allow pregnancy resource centers to talk about other options, okay, to provide an option outside of abortion. If we really cared about women's choices, wouldn't we say, hey, listen, this may be hard, but you can have the baby and give it up for an adoption because there are millions of loving parents that would give your child a life. And wouldn't it be great for you to know that you fought and you did that much for them? Or, hey, there's resources. There is tons of resources if you want to keep this child. One of the things that we do that is just evil, in my opinion, is we have completely sidelined the dad. You don't have a uterus, so you don't have a say in this. But you know what? I was working with a pregnancy resource center and they had shared with me that they had done this huge study with girls that had had abortions. And they asked them, what would have made a difference? What would have prompted you to keep the pregnancy and have the child? And it was almost 80% of the girls that had abortions said they would have not had an abortion. So one, that tells you they really didn't want to. They felt like they had no choice. They would have kept it and had the baby if their male partner was supportive, okay? think about that. So now, that's where a lot of the focus has gone. Like, let's talk to the dads. Let's let them know you are critical in this process. And isn't that just like the enemy? Satan knows, like, listen, that this young girl is scared. And if this guy will just say, look, I will walk alongside you with this and we can do this together, that the majority of them would choose life. And the fact that we have instead gone the other way, or the abortion industry has gone the other way and said, he doesn't have a voice, he doesn't have a uterus. But let me tell you something, when a woman has the child, he's on the hook for 18 years of support. How is it that he is not in the mix on this? And it's just a deception that is meant to destroy. That's the bottom line. So let's talk a little bit more about the racism piece. So the majority of abortions are to Black mothers, but the Black community is not a majority statistically of the population. So we see a huge difference in the amount of abortions that are occurring to Black mothers. Okay, number one. Number two, as I mentioned earlier, I think I mentioned that, I've recorded this video a few times now, but in the state of New York, they passed the tipping point and acknowledged recently, and this was all over the place about 2 years ago, that more Black babies in the state of New York are aborted than are born. Okay, so Margaret Sanger is probably dancing in hell over that one, right? Her goal was to use abortion to eliminate or reduce the Black population. And now we are seeing more Black babies aborted than born in the state of New York. I mean, it's heartbreaking to me. And, so the question is, another thing, that I think that we really don't do is we really don't provide, we do a hard sell. Like, if you talk to people that have gone for an abortion, or even workers in the abortion industry that have now come out, they talk about the hard sell, to include telling this young girl who's broke that if she takes time to think about it and comes back the next day, that it will cost her more than if she does the abortion right then. Like, we wouldn't even do that like with any other medical procedure. A doctor would normally be like, go think about it. Talk to people. This under the gun, process, it's horrible. And we're really destroying our young women over this because they really don't have a choice. They're being given a partial set of facts. They're not being given the entire truth. They're not being given resources. And they're basically being strong-armed into making a choice that changes their life forever, that breaks them in a little way forever. And it's just wrong. So the question is, let's look a little bit at the abortion industry. We've seen enough videos, and I'll put some in the comments so you can look them up, some links. But we've seen enough videos of Project Veritas, especially. They've come out with a bunch probably like 6 years ago, where they were they were posing as stem cell researchers that wanted to buy aborted fetal parts to do experiments on. And you're not allowed, it's against the law to sell basically body parts, but they got all these Planned Parenthood people admitting that they sell it. Recently, they just did another expose, and these people were talking about how they get around the law so that they can sell these body parts. And the amount of money that they're making is crazy. So if you wonder why they're doing this, it's a money machine. They're selling organs, they're selling all of these things. If you look at the revenues of Planned Parenthood, they're not out giving like STD tests to women. Call the clinics. They only do abortions. They're not giving out, and now they're kind of giving out trans stuff too, because there's money in that. But the majority of them are only doing abortions. And if you look at who they donate to only the Democratic Party. You never really see anything much going to Republican candidates. So think about it. Your daughter's being strong-armed to have an abortion. That baby part is bringing in money that they're putting some in their pocket, they give some to the Democratic Party. And then the Democratic Party, of course, is going to pass pro-abortion laws that allow for later and later term abortions, because that's where the real money is. The older the fetus is, the older the body part is, the more money they get. And so it is generally a profit-driven model that is being funded on the backs of our daughters and our nieces and our sisters, sadly. Another thing, I started this video talking about the fact that there is this narrative that the Republican Party are the parties of the racists. And again, it saddens me because it's so out of sync even with history. So not only are conservatives the only ones that are fighting to save Black babies and minority babies and all babies because they are the voice of pro-life, right? If we were all a bunch of racists, we would just sit back and let the Margaret Sanger machine just take out minorities, right? It's the most effective, right? She's more effective. Her abortion clinics have taken out more minorities than Hitler's concentration camps. So think about that for a minute. And then I also look, and just it's worth reminding that the Republican Party was started out as the anti-slavery party. They were the ones that started the party purely to abolish slavery and outlaw the slave trade. Whereas the Democratic Party was the party of the KKK. Again, check all my facts. It's all historical, okay? Then, even in the Civil Rights Act, that was, I think, one of the, I don't know if it was the last time we had a giant filibuster or one of the first times, but I remember it was something where 100% of the Democrats voted against that. Now I was born 5 years later, okay? So that's recent time. That's my lifespan. That the Democratic Party just 50 plus years ago was literally voting 100% against civil rights. So I would encourage you to start thinking and judging fruit. Stop listening to the talking points that without any evidence and backup. Start to dig for yourself and really wonder, okay, who do I believe and what is racist? And if I could get you to do anything here, it would be to have you question your pro-life, pro-choice stance. If you were pro-choice, just know, think about it. Abortion 50, 60 years ago was completely different. I mean, having a baby out of wedlock, okay? There was shame, there was stigma, there was a different level of crisis. Today, we're celebrating Kardashians. They're all having their babies out of wedlock. There is no stigma. We pay surrogates to just carry someone else's baby. That's applauded, okay? So from a stigma perspective, let's applaud the young girl who's carrying her baby for an adoptive family that she's going to give it up to. And know that at the roots, the abortion movement was birthed out of racism. And it is most harming the Black community. And if you would begin to step up and start to advocate for not only pro-life, but pro-life policies, okay, where if we could divert those federal funds from abortion assistance to adoption assistance, what would that look like? What good could we do? Would this be more and more, babies coming in, more and more families? Of course it would. And why wouldn't we want to do that? So anyway, I just wanted to put that in there. I hope you liked it. If you liked it, please subscribe. Please like the video. And I look forward to next time.